Welcome back to the second part of today's invited talks. And we will start with a talk from Professor Bing Yu of the University of California at Berkeley. Professor Bing Yu is a longtime friend, and very honored to have her to give us a talk. And she's the Chancellor's Distinguished Professor and the class of 1936, second chair in the Department of Statistics and Electrical Engineering and Computer Sciences at UC Berkeley. Her research interests extend beyond statistics to leverage new computational developments that solve scientific problems by combining novel statistical machine learning approaches with the domain expertise across fields such as neuroscience, genomics, remote sensing, and precision medicine. Precision medicine. Yu she's a member of the National Academy of Science and also the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a Guggenheim Fellow, a Turkey Memorial Lecturer of the Ballooning Society, a Rights Lecturer of IMS, and the COPSS E.L. Scott Prize winner. She's actually the former president of the Institute of Mathematical Statistics and serves on the director board of proceedings of National Academy of Sciences and the scientific advisory committee of the UK Turing Institute for Data Science and AI. Welcome, and the floor is all yours. Yeah, I can start whenever you want.
Thank you, Yi, for the very kind introduction. And I'd like to thank both you and Renee for having me. Feel like the first interaction between the two teams, so I'm very honored to be here. Yeah. So I think I owe the audience some explanation for two words in my title. The first is veridical. Actually, when a friend suggested this name for veridical data science, another paper, that I had to look up the dictionary, which means truthful to reality. And the PCS is an acronym for a framework my group has been developing almost like for the last 10 years. And P stands for predictability, C stands for computability, and S for ability. It's really an attempt to unify, synthesize, and streamline ideas and best practices from both machine learning and statistics. Kind of really try to bridge the two cultures. You know, if you know the paper by Leo Breiman, my late colleague from statistics. So I think this is a session on interpretability. So, you know, I don't have to say too much about the need for interpretability, especially it's regulated in EU that the users have right to explanation of statistical and machine learning algorithms. And in my own work with my students, we definitely look at like cancer images of cancer patients. And we also work with geneticists for Drosophila development and try to find driver genes for different phenotypes. And I will talk about how to use deep learning to understand a very challenging visual area called V4. And also, you know, natural language processing, we work on pathology reports. So my team is very much embedded in scientific and medical problems. So a lot of what you will see is really an attempt to bring machine learning and statistics and domain science together. So I will, you know, there's now a new term, maybe not so familiar for this audience, called scientific machine learning. So let me make a case that interpretation is necessary. And before that, I should define what's scientific machine learning. So my definition is that machine learning uses machine learning for scientific research to extract from data, discoveries, theory, and knowledge. It builds scientific principle in machine learning algorithms. So builds, you know, like symmetry, principle symmetry into deep learning. And also it uses machine learning to advance science. And so you kind of iterate between the two steps. And I think the bar for scientific machine learning should be higher for average machine learning algorithm. We need to comply to scientific standards. So because we have actually, as Yi said, we work on many different areas in science, precision medicine, genomics, and neuroscience. And I have different sub-teams of people working on this interpretation. And we put our resource together with actually my former student research idea that let's get some synthesis on what do we mean even among my own teams of different subject areas, what do we mean by interpretability? So I ended up writing this paper, appeared last year in PNS, try to define what we mean by machine learning and what are the methods to unify, compare with the three metrics, and also include applications of ourselves and other people. So we define interpret machine learning as the extraction relevant knowledge from a machine learning model. We can replace machine learning with deep learning concerning relations either containing data or learned by the model. Here we view knowledge as being relevant. So it's different from what Gita has talked. We talk about relevant to a human audience and a chosen problem. Try to really anchor the interpretability specifically for solving a problem for specific audience. And these insights will also emphasize about what's the outcome, what's the next step, communication, actions, and discovery. So in one figure, I have the P, you want your model to have certain reality check of, do prediction, global relationship that captures something. If a binary problem with balanced samples and you get 50-50 for your algorithm, I don't think it's a good idea for you to try to interpret it. But how far do you go? That's actually very much the cutting edge is like, how good enough before you do the interpretation? And then descriptive accuracy, which I'll explain. And then relevance to a problem and a human audience. For example, my doctor, if they explain algorithm to me, we work with doctor at emergency medicine, and they have decision rules. I think, that will be different if they explain that rule to me or to some other patient, say not from machine learning. So I think human audience is extremely important before we can kind of tease apart the many shades of interpretability. So our PDR framework, rely on predictive accuracy, not just global, we should also go point-wise local predictive accuracy. Maybe it's a subgroup. That's one thing we have been working for precision medicine, is to find subgroup of people that the treatment will work. Maybe not working for everyone, but can you find a subgroup that this drug actually works really well, or this drug is very harmful. Descriptive accuracy is actually quite contentious even among the 5 authors. We debated a lot to end up with this definition, is the degree to which an interpretation method objectively capture relationship learned by machine learning models. So actually we have a follow-up projects really try to define maybe quantitatively what we mean by descriptive accuracy, and relevancy is about the audience and chosen problem. And this is kind of more or less graph. We feel like the predictive accuracy and descriptive accuracy, it's more or less the more descriptive, the simpler, maybe you lose, but it's actually not always the case. I have definitely seen we have this iterative random forest that's more interpretable than random forest, actually get better predictive accuracy, but more or less, there might be a trade-off. And if you look at model-based interpretability, so the view we're taking in the paper is really that the model is already fit, and you want to look at it and you want to interpret it for a particular audience, explain why there's certain predictions, certain diagnosis. So the common agreed upon interpretability, like I would say qualities or characteristics, maybe sparsity, but it really, I don't think you have 1 million data points, you have a term like logistic regression model for 100 terms. That's not really humanly interpretable. Maybe 5, even 10, I think is challenging. And another thing we want to introduce is simulatability. It's like, how can the patient trace back the decision process and say, oh, that's how you arrived at my diagnosis. Deep learning will be impossible for a layman. So that's important too. And also modularity. Can you take it apart, which deep learning has a little of that, is different units kind of repetitive and similar or composable. And the other is, can you do domain-based engineering, right? Credit score. In the beginning, is some features, raw features, and then you end up have a compound feature and later become interpretable because people start understand what can do, what can you for, you have operational meaning. And the other way around is you actually use machine learning to come up with new features, as I said. The other is use domain knowledge and try to map with the features you have. And the post-hoc interpretability, as I mentioned, is look at importance scores like global, like importance of features, interactions, p-values, and visualization at the global level. Or you can look at specific. local subgroups or particular individual. What are the things driving this diagnosis for a particular patient? So this all good is like supposed to be useful, we hope, for the users to evaluate and compare different interpretation methods. I don't believe there's the right interpretation measure for all deep learning tasks. So we just have to understand when and how which interpretation works, and sometimes maybe even combine them. I'm very much into stability, as you will see. Maybe you don't know which one works better, you should find something that the different interpretation method give you similar interpretation. But this is all, suppose you already fitted the model and you already have the data. And you're being kind of faithful over vertical here to the model or to the data maybe. But a lot of things happen before you have a data in a matrix form you can work on with typical machine learning algorithm. So we do have some reality checks through predictability, but it's really more focused not on the entire data science lifecycle. And I think we need to go there to really look at how we arrive at this model instead of, oh, let's just look at it for a more complete investigation of matching with reality. And a first step towards that, that's what I'm defining as veridical interpretability, is really we need a quality control data science lifecycle, so that every step is rigorous and embedded, not just after the data have been cleaned, because we know that you can introduce a lot of errors in things you might not want in data cleaning and problem formulation. So this brings me to the rest of the talk. So I want to share this PCS framework. This is more for reliable and responsible data analysis decision-making, and marry this with interpretability, which we call veridical interpretability. So it's kind of a new concept. We have a paper called veridical data science, but now emphasizing the interpretability part. And now I illustrate the framework in one project in neuroscience called DeepTune. And if I have time, I'll talk about a particular line of work we have developed for deep learning, and that with some cosmology project. Okay, so I'm advocating that our PCS work, which we had 4 motivating projects, and now we have 2 like application, all work really well. It's really a conceptual framework. It doesn't tell exactly what to do, but give you the landmarks for you to follow, to think through in the context of your particular problems. Again, veridical means truthful to reality. Actually, there's a Spanish word called veridical, CO. It's still commonly used in Spanish, but veridical in English, it's not very much used. So it's good for us to define it and use it in machine learning and statistics. So the framework, as I mentioned earlier, appeared in a paper. PCS was like one of the longest writing papers I've done, 3 or 4 years with my former student, Carl Combier. And P means predictability. It's really taking this popularity of predictability from machine learning. Of course, statistics always had predictability, but it was not at the center. And computability, that's one thing machine learning did on top of a lot of probabilistic modeling framework, is put computation at the center. And we generalize the concept of uncertainty, sample-to-sample variability, to stability relative to any reasonable perturbation for the entire data science lifecycle. And then my student Bartel, with my co-author book, I will edify the end to say that it's really need these 3 components to build a beautiful veridical data science train. So PCS bridges the O'Brien's 2 cultures and unifies and expands best practices from machine learning and statistics. That's the attempt, and streamlines. It's like a standardization and quality control. PCS, since I'm very interested in science, it's actually really connect science with engineering, right? I mean, data science really has 2 legs. One's the scientific thinking, the other is engineering thinking. And predictability and stability actually embed 2 very important scientific principles, prediction and replication. And computability, of course, is already machine learning, but we expand the meaning and computability from machine learning, just research convergence and scalability, actually to include thoughtful, well-designed, data-inspired simulations. And I have been going after stability for the last close to 10 years. The first paper appeared 2013 was actually the result of my 2-key lecture for Bernoulli Society. So I was time preparing from a lecture for name of Tukey. So I thought I have to make a connection. At the time, I was working with Jake Galan's lab, try to interpret some lasso model based on some Gabor feature with some movie reconstruction projects like Times Magazine dubbed it as mind reading. And so the unification came one combined sample-to-sample variability data perturbation and make it kind of equally important as same time model perturbation, which is the essence of robust statistics in a way. You want some center of data to be meaningful and useful when you have like longer tail Laplacian or Gaussian. So it's really unify many work in the literature, which is different versions of perturbation analysis. Right? Numerical analysis has stability analysis, dynamic system has stability analysis, and Bayesian inference has sensitivity analysis, and we have bootstrap, and we have robust statistics. So this is an attempt to put it under the same umbrella. So we're doing really robust considerations, and you argue for particular perturbation being reasonable. So I started by thinking this is for interpretability. At the time, there was a lot of negative coverage about false discoveries in biology and reproducibility. And recently, we have developed working this predictability and stability, of course, computability. So it's there for a hypothesis generation or scientific recommendation system for our collaborators to do experiments to prove causality. But we know that predictability follows from causality, but it's not enough. And adding stability on top of that, you are closer to causality. You don't prove causality, but you're closer. So let's take a step back, look at the data science lifecycle as a whole hardware kind of system. And predictability is for reality check. You want this system really connecting with reality. And stability is really, you want to look at every step. We make so many human judgment calls, right? How do you formulate the problem? For genomics, what type of public database, which lab you work with, even for the same problem? And you clean data many ways. One graduate student cleaned the other way. Do you get the same result? So it's really try to shake the system so that it doesn't break. And visualization, what part of the data you can look at. And as you will see in our DeepTune work, we have 18 different deep learning-based models to give very similar predictions. Which one you're going to take to interpret? So instead of pretending it's not there, we should just make it open and transparent and really face it squarely. We have these perturbations, human judgment calls. Unless we know which one's better, we should seek stability. And the PCS workflow is really try to consider PCS in every step of the data science lifecycle. P stands for the future. This is really related to transfer learning. When you have, what you develop now, the future is always different. Do you have enough stability relative to what you want to work on so that you get good results? And this is in medical literature called external validity, which has been existed long, for many decades. And then we also expanded on like confidence interval. We have perturbation intervals. It's a PCS inference. So we have different forms under the so-called IID paradigm, cross-validation, bootstrap. Actually, we at least have three. And we don't even compare the three. You don't always get the same result. And Leo Breiman likes to add small noise to data. And you can also use the model to bootstrap. And for time series, you can do block bootstrap. And the more recent version is really model data modality, right? There was this particular professional worker level test that people will go to different people's home in different countries, and they can even audio tape the conversation video. Would you get the same conclusion about the skill set of this person? And I also want to cover the synthetic data from mechanistic PDE models into the data perturbation framework, which is like expansion on statistical uncertainty that I think actually Peter Bill and Sergei Lavi's group use this PDE model to get more data about our arm reaching out for a bottle instead of collect data with graduate student doing that. So everything can be kind of unified under this perturbation kind of framing. And then people already use invariance in causal inference, say that if two mechanisms kind of similar under two Different environments is more likely they might be causal. And then differential privacy is actually a form of stability. And the adversarial attacks that we know that you can really slightly perturb the medical imaging, you get very different diagnosis. So that's very concerning. And for the model perturbations that we do it, but we usually stay with one kind, but there's no reason when you do supervised learning, the Sul Ridge, random forest, deep learning, they all supervised learning method. You can perturb all of them. And you basically have, with this deep learning, you have non-convex problem. Depends on where you start, you basically have multiple models relative to different local minimum and kernel machines. So for the inference part, the climate scientists already leading the way, right? You have 9 leading climate models for global temperature. Instead of 1.5, the magenta curve, the interval is from 1.5 degrees in like 50 years to 0.55. So the scientists already going there because they know that different teams of people don't end up doing the same prediction. They have different boundary conditions and maybe different granularity of the simulation, the regional level, global level, and they get different results. So it's good to see all of them and put them together and allow them to be looked at together called perturbation intervals. If you have a perfect probabilistic model, only sample to sample ability, you go back to confidence intervals. But we're not in that nice, idealized situation. So in deep learning, we make so many human judgment calls, right? Do you use ImageNet 1 or ImageNet 2 right there? Which deep learning architecture? What algorithm you're going to use? What's the size? What's the best size? And what data perturbation giving a data set? Are you going to do cross-validation, subsampling, or bootstrap? And what post-hoc plots you're going to look at to interpret, right? We have many different interpretation methods, including one I will talk about our own. And then what interpretation to what people? And then the key is what conclusion for what purpose? So it's good to keep action in mind when we do modeling, because generic solutions, I think we already passed that point. We really need to be more specific and solve specific problems. We have pretty good generic kind of approaches. We're kind of okay for everything, but now I think the game is really going to the next level, get the specific problem in hand and solve it better. And then PCS documentation, extremely important. You have reality. And your model is really a mental construct. Is there a bridge there? Are they connected? You actually don't see the bridge. You have to do the work to make them connect. Otherwise, it's just mental construct and reality. You put them in the same paper without evidence, they don't have to connect. And you have this R Markdown or Jupyter Notebook put on GitHub. Everybody can scrutinize how you made your choices on these different perturbation schemes, or you subject yourself to stability principle. Cannot use prior knowledge to say one is better than others to try. Use prediction as a guide, scrutinize some, and then seek stability. Otherwise, you basically founding your theory or your conclusion on a broken house. I mentioned this already, right? This is the latest one. It wasn't there when I did the 2013 paper. It's really have a scientific recommendation system. And I think we also need to think about causality, a whole spectrum instead of causal or not, especially with observational data. It's really, we should talk about strengths of evidence to our causality. And I think stability, a PCS, has a lot to contribute towards more refined evidence, I would say gathering, creating. Any questions? If not, I'm going to go to the 2 projects. So this is actually one of the 4 motivating projects for us to arrive at the PCS framework. So the approach I take in my group is that we always ground ourselves in solving a particular scientific or domain problem, and then we generalize. I just believe that this way we develop more useful methods than thinking in your office and hope you can find a problem, whatever develop will solve. I just don't believe on that. It's not like never, never. The chance that's going to be useful is less in my mind. So I'm being a Bayesian here. So that's the approach we have been taken. We have done ESCV before this, which is stability-driven cross-validation to get more sparse models with Lasso. And we often see very good performance, which reduce the size of the model, but doesn't really, doesn't lose predictability, sometimes even helps. Another project we did was iterative random forest. We add stability into random forest and get nonlinear interactions. And for Drosophila enhancer data prediction, the top 20 we found with two-way interaction at 80% was already validated in the literature by physical experiment before we even touch our data. So this was a really nice surprise. Another one is using adding stability to non-negative metric fixation. So I have a lot of successes adding stability on top of predictability. And this is a project, we're still writing the paper because we got a revision, but we have been still revising because Jack wants to write a paper that will be read 100 years from now. We're still writing it. The paper is on ICAP. So it was led by my two former students now, Risa now UCSF and Yuan Si joining Duke, and Adam at Google. Mike Oliver, I think, was at Allen Institute, and Ben Wilmore at Oxford was former postdoc Jack. It took him 2 years to collect the data. So it's very expensive data. It's like collected 10 years, and there's not really much publication using the data. So that's what we try to do. So as already said, right, my lab's approach to scientific machine learning is always embed my student and postdoc on site in the web lab, and then we generalize. We solve a particular problem. The bar is that any new methodology leaving my lab, I cannot say 100% time, but that's the goal, should at least solve a new problem. So V4 is a very difficult, elusive area. Actually, Jack's postdoc work was on V4, and it's on the word pathway. V1, V2 kind of edge detection and orientation, frequency, and location. But V4 is before IT, which is object recognition. So it really cares about complex shapes and stimuli. Like what they mean is if you shine some complex patterns, the V4 neuron like that, have higher firing rate. On the other hand, in the last decade or so, we see this huge development of neural networks with new names like deep learning and convolutional network, which are actually older. So what we try to do is really borrowing the traditional physiology way of thinking. That's how actually V1 was, the functionality of V1 was discovered by 2 Nobel Prize winners later. That what you hear is the firing rate. And then this is really looking at location, and you can see what induce the firing. So this is saying this neuron, you hear the spike train into a sound. And what you see is what's on the screen for the cat to look at. And you put something there, and then this is approve that locality. This neuron cares about this location. This is looking for some receptivity. But for V4, of course, if we had the data, we all have gotten Nobel Prize, right? The question, how did they figure it out? How to design the experiment? And for V4, people just design very beautiful geometric, but very artificial shapes. You can see they're all kind of nicely artistic looking. And then in the V4 area, particular neuron, and see whether we induce firing, as you heard, right? And just this is like shooting in the dark. And people also figured out with very delicate concave and convex boundaries, and to know that V4 actually care about these concave and concave boundaries. It's very, very refined. I mean, there are two problems. First, this is very time consuming, and you might miss a lot of shapes that the neuron cares and you didn't design, right? So it's not really very efficient. And Jack, when I joined, working with him like 15 years ago, he was really a pioneer using natural stimuli. Now it's basically all accepted. At the time, people are not all accepting using not the synthetic stimuli, but using natural stimuli. So it's an old black and white database, and randomly selected and put, for this macaque, small primate, and after fixation, and then to study 75 neurons from 2 macaques, but we didn't see any difference. We just put them together as a population. And we started working on this 7 years ago, At least that paper has never been written, with my former postdoc, Julien Merel. Some of you might have heard, it's really a leading young researcher in France on computer vision. And then another young statistician at the time, Yoel Benjamin, now professor at the University of Jerusalem. Two of my best people. And we designed a 2-layer basically using some sparse coding and SIFT features to design 2-layer neural networks. And I give this talk on the first work. That paper still hasn't been finished. About 5 years ago, and Joshua Benji was talking after me. So I felt like, wow, he was doing deep learning. I was doing my own way of neural networks. And I decided to try deep learning. So that's why I got into deep learning. And parallel in Jim DeCarlo's lab at MIT, they have been looking at IT and very similar, but in the beginning, the images are different. So they did very good predictive modeling and didn't go, we become a parallel approaches of interpretation, I understand, but they were a lot faster because the whole lab, I have just a small team. And Jack doesn't do physiology anymore, so we couldn't do experiment. That was very useful for developing the PCS framework. We visited them, had really interesting discussions. And actually Jim was really saying that I want everything automated. We kind of went back to the more traditional classical physiology, want everything humanly interpreted, he wanted everything automated. So we kind of agreed that probably a combination would be the best approach. So the question for this project, we want to characterize V4 neurons and generate hypotheses, which can be verified by experiments. And we just couldn't help thinking that, can we land any evidence about the convolutional networks? Does it really resemble brain function in any ways? It's kind of, so we end up doing, in the beginning, we designed our own 2-layer neural network, but this, what I'll talk about, is really build on the AlexNet or other net, early versions of it, to do feature extraction. And we end up with 18 different state-of-the-art model. And then with the last step, we use lasso ridge to predict the firing rate, right? So do feature extraction, do very simple linear model. And we end up with 18 state-of-the-art prediction models. And the project basically is just stuck. We had the P, and how do we introduce stability? It took us many months, and I will show you how we end up doing. And then I was amazed how well it worked, right? I have my 2 best people work up 2 years and use deep learning linear model. It just beat us slightly, but still it was like effortless because we borrow strengths from other people's work. So this is really transfer learning in 3 different senses. We took AlexNet, trained on ImageNet, had nothing to do with our data. And we made our image into color by just giving 3 channels the same intensity. And then we used the first 2 layers of AlexNet as extraction. That's why medical imaging works, right? It's like somehow the early layers really capture, to a good extent, the early processing for primate visual cortex. And then we use ridge or lasso to connect with our single neuron V1 neural activity, right? And then the predicted performance on replicated data completely set aside with tenfold replication. It did better now, homemade kind of network. So that's why basically I jumped into deep learning. I thought there's something there that it works, why it works. So I said from color to black and white, that's 1 layer of transferring. And then the other is we have human data. And here we have animal data. And then it was trained for very high level tasks. And now we're going to very small scale level of single neuron activity and just really worked. Basically, one interpretation, one possibility that the AlexNet become a surrogate processing unit for the macaque brain and feeding into the V4. So here's the result. Definitely V4 is not Gabor. If you do Gabor-like models, it just doesn't work. But many layers work. First, we thought, oh, maybe you can map V4 to 1 layer of AlexNet. It's not. There's no good mapping of the physical V4 area to a particular layer of AlexNet. And then how do you interpret? Took us a while, and we borrowed idea from Deep Dream, but also that's what that experiment I showed you, right? They really say that the classical physiology really characterize a neuron by the stimuli that the neuron gets excited. So we say if a model feed the data pretty well, we can use the model to search for such stimuli that excite the fitted model. That's what called DeepTune image. And you can see we start with Gaussian white noise, and you see this curvature coming up. And you can also remove the nodes using a prediction as a guideline, and still the curvatures persist. So this is, we know that, V4 neuron care about curvature. So this is probably, it's another perturbation, right, in PCS. It's changing the model by removing nodes. And then we want other evidence. If you look at the small database, we have black and white, and take all the images that excite this model neuron 1, you see curvature again. So this is, but maybe you said this is just an illusion because of your model. That's a fair point. So we went back to original test data without models and look at the stimuli that excited this just pure observed firing rate. You still see curvature. So this is no model. So this is really confirmed that this neuron somehow likes curvature. But we have AlexNet, we have VGG, and we have GoogleNet. They all work really well. We have Lasso, we have Ridge. It doesn't matter too much difference. They're almost on top of each other, different color line. I mean, the dark dash lines are observed. So the one reason we couldn't really reach the height of the observed data is because our training data is only 1, so it doesn't have the high precision as the test data, which is average of 10 replicates. So there's a lot of details, just the noise level is different. So we end up with 18 models because each, like AlexNet, also you can take 3 layers, 3 possibilities, that's 9, Ridge and Lasso, another 2, so 18. We can pick one we think look prettiest, but I think that was a little cheating. So we want to follow stability principle and get stable. So that's what you get. If you take the 18 models and maximize using randoms, this is actually a little regularized. And you always see the curvature, but each model has their own characteristic, which is individual. So really putting them together really give you more confidence that it's probably this big high level, coarser levels pattern curvature is really the real message, not like the eye like Google Net. You see that in Deep Dream too. So it's really to get, and for a while I was actually giving talks with these 18 images. There was one talk I gave about 2 years ago that the audience was not happy. They want 1 image. So we went back to the drawing board and say, how do we come up with 1 measure? Again, stability principle. We decide that at the gradient level, because when you maximize this fitted model surface regularized, you basically do a gradient ascent. Individually, you have 18 gradient. So we said that at the gradient level, we're actually going to do stability and take the smallest component-wise gradient and move that direction. If you do that, we call consensus DeepTune. This is 10 different randomized starting points. So you get very, very consistent consensus to images. And coming back to computability is that we do stochastic gradient ascent or descent. And we also fit Lasso and Ridge with gradient descent. So it is all gradient-based methods for speed. Now, every neuron have this representative DeepTune some consensus images. Now you can look at the 71 together and get some population study. And you can see that we confirm what people already know, long curved contours, but this is a lot richer. Remember the geometric one designed by humans? This is a lot richer set of stimuli to really describe V4 neurons than just a very contrived geometric, very delicate design. And there are other complex patterns. Nobody had designed that. It just shows up. So this is much richer, more realistic. And you see this outlier, it's really like edge detection. So it's like really like a V1 like neuron, but with higher receptive field, which is possible in V4. And really ideally would be, we can feed this back with this DeepTune images and see whether the neuron, like the experiment showed you about V1, really fired up. We don't have the lab manual. Jack was not doing physiology, but actually James' lab did that. They have their own version of something like what we did. And this is really proof that if we had a lab, we could have done what Jimmy did, James' lab did, but we didn't. But to us, was really reassuring that was a good work. It just we couldn't quite beat James slide because they just had more people and had a bad exam, but it was hugely important for developing the PCS framework. And to connect the DeepTune from the PDR, the first part, we used P, which is also predictability in PDR, descriptive accuracy, that we have sparsity at last layer. If you use lasso, we have modularity. And the first layer is very interpretable and domain-driven using Gabor. And for the deep learning part, you can kind of explain to people use this composability and give you some simulability to explain how the decision is made. And the relevance to the human audience, I think our work is relevant to computer neuroscientists. And through peer review and talk feedback, and maybe the neurotime where we use our technique to really design more natural stimuli-driven experiments, not just for V4 neurons, but also other areas, and maybe the deep learning community, and with the design of experiments. So the last part, I will talk, probably I don't have much time for some questions. Let me just go pretty quick. It's really a standalone line of research. It's 4 conference papers that try to interpret deep learning model. We start with the LSTM, and then it's for like different patches, and we build more hierarchical interpretation. The second paper, Agglomerative CD, and then how do we use these scores to improve, debias the algorithm? That's another recent paper, and then we use it for a cosmology problem. So I have to go run this very fast. It's just 4 papers at my website. So this is what I think Gita actually reviewed, that is the gradient-based or occlusion-based. Our method is more like occlusion-based. And started 2018 Arcler paper. It really, this is really work of my former student, Jamie Murdoch, and later joined by Chandan Singh, who is in the audience, I hope. And he started this when he was doing an intern with Peter Liu at Google, and I joined later. So it's really looking at text and try to say that, can we decompose the fitting, the weights in a way additive, which is not unique, so that we can attribute the contribution in the prediction to different parts, not just for single basic units, but also for patches and phrases. And the second paper is really built on that to make it more interpretable. So we start with this CD scores for these basic units, and we use the joint scores because CD also give you joint scores so that you have the best improvement, and you just join. And this can identify when, well, this is actually was wrongly classified. You can see everything was okay until the last step. So give you a sense of where the prediction got flipped. And you can do the same for images. That's the generalization of the second paper. So that, POC, you try to predict POC. And then this is really saying the scales are important because they are very highly correlated. And you can actually remove the POC, the algorithm will still predict POC because this correlation that's often underlying a lot of unfairness of the algorithms. And we did human experiments with some Stanford sentiment data and MNIST and ImageNet. And you can see that our CDAC score overall give better results. And the first, I think quite interesting, this is an area I think for machine learning research, we should think harder about how to design these human experiments. For me, interpretation is consumed by humans and you want to get the audience right. So the first one is really, the subject actually graduate student in my group at ECS, about 11 of them. Can we tell a model from a good one from a bad one? So what we did is that we changed the weights in the model so that still give the same prediction, but the weights become kind of really off because we changed that. And then from the interpretation, can the subject tell which one even to give the same prediction? And the second one is that from the interpretation, do you trust the model? That's a lot of time what we try to do. So these two experiments together really make the result interpretable than just one of them. You can have a lot of beautiful interpretation people might trust because it's beautiful. It doesn't mean it really reflect what really the mechanism, the prediction. So you really need to do the experiment together. And the ICML paper this year was really supervised by Chand and Jamie and Laura, who was a visiting student from Denmark, that actually use the scores in the process of fitting, try to de-emphasize certain features that you don't want your algorithm to depend on. And the last part, I think I'm really more interested. So I have been pushing the group that let's do something real. I think this sentiment analysis doesn't excite me. So this is working with two cosmologists, Francois and Valerie, I think. And then my postdoc, Wusuk and Chad from my group. And it's an ICML scientific machine learning interpretation workshop paper. So what we have here, they simulated this cosmology parameter called omega m. And this is completely PD simulation. And then what we see is the simulated, if you understand all the physics. It's a very important parameter. Can you use this simulated universe to estimate omega m? And if you can, maybe we can use the real data to estimate really the big band parameter of omega m. So it does predict well, but does it learn the right thing? So we first want to see whether the deep learning is relying on features that really make sense in terms of cosmology. So CD can be used also in the transform domain, in the frequency domain. That's what you see with frequency 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4. And you add up the scores, you can see that the like 0.9 is high frequency, really not that important. And we did this very simple toy simulation to really, well, we know the truth. We simulated this response function only depends on one frequency. And we compare different methods. And we can see that CD score, the other method also used on transform domain. They all do relatively well, but we're really doing tenfold better. And if you look at the error rate, well, at 0.4%, the other methods at 4%. So this is just illustrate that at least for this project, for this cosmology interpretation problem, our method has an edge. Okay, to summarize, I think to go back to my topic of veridical interpretation for deep learning, for this project, I think generally useful, maybe you can save on data collection. There's certain data doesn't have to be collected because it's not really driving your prediction. And understand what feature drive the predictions. It's kind of towards causality, but really it's the association. You have to do some perturbation to really prove it. And then maybe you can provide trust to deep learning. When people see things, they might trust better. And really, I like to see, can we distill deep learning? I mean, deep learning is used in cosmology and many other scientific areas to go back to the tradition of generative mechanistic model. At least the deep learning model can give you a benchmark for prediction performance. And then we can bring in domain knowledge and build a mechanistic model. And the success of these goals, I mean, we might serve other goals as validation of deep learning interpretation. So to summary for the talk, I put forward this concept of veridical data interpretability, building our veridical data science work, and make a case that it's designed for scientific machine learning and hopefully for other applications in machine learning as well. And the PCS framework was developed in my group over like the course of a decade. And the paper is out, and we have very successful empirical work, use the basic principles and concept to really solve particular problem in precision medicine and genomics, and the other one's neuroscience, right? And just generic for model selection. And our interpret machine learning work, PDR, is really connects well, but doesn't look at the whole process. It's more for evaluation. And PCS allow you to vet the whole process from data cleaning, data choice, so that we have better sense about matching with reality of your interpretation. And I use two examples to illustrate PCS and also the other just for deep learning. And we now try to get into more domain problems. There's one BioHub project we're working on to look at the cardiovascular health. And we're also actually part of the other team that on collaboration on foundation of deep learning. So it's a great opportunity for my group. We did one paper on revisiting variance and the bias in deep learning motivated, but it's really a high dimensional linear model. Going back to something I used to work on minimum distribution lines, but this is a great opportunity with your team and my team to really push forward, better understand deep learning. So last plug, that I'm working on a book with my former student, current postdoc, Rebecca Butter. This is for upper division and beginning graduate course, and MIT Press we sign a contract, hopefully to appear early next year. It's really try to bring in the PCS critical thinking framework and start with the whole process of data cleaning, all of that in a textbook, and really emphasize critical thinking and try to use minimum math so that more people can really embrace data science. Thank you. And the papers and codes are at my website. It's easy to remember, being at stat.berkeley.edu, and the two frameworks. I hope someone you'll find interesting and take a look at the papers. Thank you.
Thank you, Bing, for a wonderful talk. And now we can take some questions from the audience.
Okay. Hello, Professor Yu. I'm a PhD student at the University of Utah. I'm working on machine learning optimization. So I have a question about computability. So to my understanding, if a model has a predictability, it means has a high prediction accuracy, yes. So if it has a predictability, then I think it has computability because prediction is computed. So I'm not sure why do we need additional computability?
Because computability is like looking at, you can compute the predicted accuracy, but having a lot of computing resource. You also want to be like energy efficient. So you want to be accuracy and also same time, and don't use a lot of computing resources. So like scalability, all of that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I'm also including under computability. I think it's kind of not really well developed yet, both in statistical machine learning. How do we well design a computer data-driven simulation studies so that can augment the real data we have and understand algorithms better? So that's an area I think was very interesting. How do we agree on a battery of simulation setups? I think causal inference people actually do that. I might not agree with everything, how they design it, but I think it's great that actually they do have these batteries of a computer. Usually data-driven, that you can use the X from real data and you make up your Y. And maybe in OR papers, in OR development, we actually fit a model from real data, and then we perturb certain terms with some added noise. And that's our simulation model. So it's important not just to analytical function. I'm very suspicious of in high dimension because it's too nice. So that's what something we say in the paper, but we need to do a follow-up paper to really articulate that. Thank you for the question. Yeah.
You're welcome. Actually, my research is on computation complexity.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So if you can, I mean, we in the paper we mentioned, but we haven't really tied together. The paper really tied together predictability, stability better than with computability. So it's something if you want to look into, that'd be great. We kind of conceptually have it there, but in our implementation, we didn't really bring it in at the quantitative level.
Maybe when I am your postdoc later, maybe.
We do have a postdoc for the whole team, so apply. We have joined 6 positions among 11 of us on our collaboration on foundations team. I think there is a call out for application, so take a look. Yeah.
Okay. Some more questions from the audience? Ask.
So I actually have more of a neuroscience question for you. So in my past life, I did neuroscience, and the visual system probably has a 20 or 30-year head start on the rest of the brain in terms of how well it's understood. I was just curious if you had any plans or if you've done any preliminary experiments in other parts of the brain, right? So in terms of what's known about vision, something like even primary auditory cortex is still not entirely agreed upon, really what it's doing. I was just curious if you'd ever tried applying these methods to neural recordings in other parts of the brain.
Yeah, so my interest in neuroscience has evolved. Now we have this neural hub, Sandy Weil neural hub between UCSF, Berkeley, and the UW. So there is more like trying to understand neurodegenerative disease. And there, I'm really take opportunities. I have been working with the ABC, Berkeley's Advanced Bioimaging Lab, Guko, who is the scientific director, on very nanoscale imagings. And I'm trying to put 2 of my collaborators together, the Tom from UW, understanding Alzheimer's. So we try to get tissues over to see whether we can use this nanoscale imaging to look at Alzheimer's tissue. So it's kind of different, very different from, but on the neuroscience, small basic science front, I would love to have, I have a student in my class, she talked to me about mouse population of neurons. I think a natural extension of what we did for DeepTune is actually look at population of neurons. But we couldn't access the data from Jack's lab for various reasons. And then my student graduated, and but follow that line, I really like to generalize the DeepTune concept to population of neurons. A student in my class.
That'd be great. I mean, there's a lot of tools now for looking at population data, but
everyone
looks at it individually still, so it's not really doing anything.
Yeah, we talked about it, that we even made plans, but we didn't have access to data. So that's why we kind of, and then Riza and Rensi left the lab. So that's something I really want to go if, when the opportunity arises. Because single neuron is really not the meaningful unit in a way. It's interesting, right? But you really, for functionality, for meaning, you really have to go to population of neurons.
Yeah, I agree. Right now, even the visualization of the deep networks is still a single neuron.
Yeah,
right?
That doesn't make sense.
Just that doesn't make much sense at all, right?
Yeah.
The people feel like it's more like, and then I have a question. Since you worked apparently very closely with scientists, right? Neuroscience and also in cosmology. So what do you think, if you have to name one thing that those scientists want from us, help from computation or from statistician or machine learning or data scientist, or I mean, data science means on the processing side, what would it be? Like, what we can help? What's the most important thing we can help?
I think it's really, I think we need to build more robust systems for them and with interpretability.
I see.
Is that I really see what we need. That's what I want to do. Is a human brain interface, a human machine collaboration that is an iterative loop. So we have all these small standalone methods, and then we can get easily human input, and then we can update. That's my idealized, I'll call statistic genie. That's what. And then with all the stability considered with a button, right? So one thing is that if you want to do this stability analysis, so basically when you enter your data into a particular platform, say R or Python, the machine already knows you're doing supervised learning or not. And then can also make suggestions. And it's like, can we augment human intelligence in a seamless manner? Interpretation is at heart, and we have to be robust, and we have to be interpretable. And can we also suggest, that's what the hypothesis for them to do. So I asked my biology friends, how do you decide which experiment to do? And they were like, oh, I read papers, I think about it, and I decide. And I felt like maybe you can help, right? Maybe you can get them. That's what we do with Sue Seneca's lab. We basically work with them, say, here's what we got. And we also randomize. So when we showed her results, she's a top Drosophila scientist from the IBL, we give her fake results too, because I don't want her to have confirmation bias. Right, because so we're also very careful how we present the result to her. So we have really authentic veridical information out.
I see.
And then we did some experiments with some earlier work we did, and we find a gene which is computing gene. I call it a favorite gene, my favorite gene. Then if you do the mutant, the embryo dies at 16th hour. So we know it's an important gene, but our prediction was completely wrong. We thought it's related to gap gene network. But it's not. We think it's related to nerve system development. So I'm now pushing to see whether I can name the gene. So one day you hear a famous knife gene, I named it.
Okay. Good.
So
yeah. Thanks a lot.
I think that's what we can do. But I think we really need to build big teams to do this together. The astrology, cosmology people, they work with like 200 people team because they only have 1 or 2 telescopes.
I see. Okay. All right.
Energy together.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I think appreciate. I mean, if you want, we actually after my talk there will be half an hour, for kind of or even more. We can actually have some discussions, or people have more questions. We can stick around.
Sure.
Maybe my talk will be.
I have a question for Professor Yu. So, do you think data dimension reduction will be helpful before the plugging all the data into the network?
I mean, to fit the neural network?
Yeah, so would data dimension reduction, because the data usually is high dimension, very sparse.
Yeah. I think if you do the right dimensionality, of course, it will help. If you do the wrong one, you might get all the signals out. So it always depends. That's my universal answer to any question. It all depends. So we do work with like the heart disease problem. We do talk to them and then try to reduce dimensionality by using their prior knowledge. So you have good, very well supported dimensionality, yes, go for it. But if you don't, you might also reduce a lot of the signal.
Okay, thanks.
So it's double-edged sword. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can we switch